constructing this sermon around something that happened to me a few days before I came out here from Florida. And how do I describe this thing that happened? Up until yesterday morning, I actually had a pretty good visual of it, and I'm afraid I got to see this. I don't have to describe it in words. What happened was this thing, I'm going to call it the mother of all sunburns. Or as someone last night put it, the family wedding was a beautiful affair, and I almost wasn't going to go because I'll get into it, but somebody last night, was really actually glad I got to talk to, said, yeah, you've got the really white boy curse. And, this part's just the best. Because, you know how you always say, I never get a tan? Well, not only did I have a tan, I had a deep tan. I had a baked tan. Except it wasn't a tan, it was a sunburn, and it started to crack, and ugh. And you know what was underneath all that? Just more white. Anyway, up until yesterday morning, it was impressive, this sunburn, if you like that kind of thing. I could have been an extra in Night of the Living Dead. And in some ways, I'm sure the beginning of the sermon would have been more impactful if I still looked like that, but God is merciful, and moreover, when you are going to a family wedding, and you know you're already the outlaw in a room full of in-laws, well, one does a lot of scrubbing and facial cleansing, and this is probably not as good as it gets. So, suffice it to say, though, that when I was flying up from Florida in a little tiny airplane seat, I don't fit into all that well, I realized that I looked singed, shall we say. In fact, when I was walking through the airport, I overheard a little kid say to his mother, "Look, Mommy, that priest looks all burned up." At least he didn't say that priest looks like he's been to hell and back. Although there have been a few moments when it's been feeling like that. First it's the burning, then it's the itching, then it's the feeling, then it's the itching. We'll get back to that in a few moments. I guess I gotta explain this whole thing, okay? I gotta explain how this happened to me. It all started off with a boat. I've always liked boating. It's hard to believe that as a young man I was actually a Boy Scout. And in fact, I was probably the world's most unlikely Eagle Scout. So I did a little bit of boating as a Boy Scout. And when we moved to Florida, of course in Florida, we're on the east coast of Florida, there's water everywhere. At least the east of us there is. There's water all over. That's the west of the lakes. Water, and I didn't really go looking for it. It kind of found me. The 22-foot Catalina single-masted sailboat. It found me. And it's just the right size for a pair of complete, almost total neophytes. And I have to say that after a couple of really scary and decidedly embarrassing attempts to get out of port, we've gotten to be, at least a little less embarrassed. Now, the other thing I should say about this is the sailboat suits my personality exactly. It's anachronistic. Take this down. It's anachronistic, it's dramatic, and it doesn't move very fast. When there's wind, it's an absolute joy. When there isn't, well, that's still okay too, because I can just sit on the water and think and work out sermons and pray. And you've ever sailed before, you know that there's a lot of prayer involved in sailing. There's also a lot of cursing too, praying or cursing, but I try to stick to the praying part. So I go out in the morning, and I'm thinking, I'm just going to go out for a couple hours, and I'm not going to do that work, but I'm just going to go out for a couple hours and practice a little so I get better at this. There's no wind. And that's where that little tiny outboard motor becomes my best friend, because otherwise sailboats don't move. So out I go into the lagoon and on into the kind of the river part of that, especially leads out to intercoastal waterway and all that. So I'm figuring, I see the clouds, gathering clouds, hopefully not clouds of judgment, but they're gathering clouds, and I figure sooner or later with all those clouds there's going to be some wind. So out I go, and I'm looking for wind. You can see a sailor, or in my case a wannabe sailor, craves wind the way a drunk craves whiskey. And And let's just say by then I was jonesing. So, you know, I wanted the wind, and eventually the wind I got, steady, predictable, beautiful wind. And, you know, enough to get it up to pulse speed. That means that's the fastest the boat can go without outside help. So I was very happy. A 2-hour jaunt became a half a day jaunt, and at some point I'm feeling kind of like Tony the Sailor Man. Okay? And I realized, despite the fact that the wind is very, very, very hot, and my shirt is soaked with perspiration. Now, even though this isn't the kind of thing I usually do, and this is probably an image you could do without going home with, I decided to ditch the shirt. I figured no one's going to see me, and if they do, so what? What's the worst that can happen? They'll read about it in the morning paper, albino walrus seen skippering small single-mast sailboats. Not so bad. So now I'm really feeling like Mr. I got the wind, I got the heat, I got the sweat, I got the bare chest, I got the tiller in my hand, I'm racing with the wind, and the Florida sun's beating down my back, down my front, down my face, on my head. Well, by the time I got home, I had sunburn, sun poisoning, a whole lot of other sun-related ailments. I drank a gallon of water, a half gallon of herbal tea, and I had a beer. And I had another one. I felt dizzy, but I didn't feel nauseous until I read about how the president of the AGO said at the National Convention, his National Convention keynote address said that he wanted all Mills organists to go home and learn to play a ballad from Disney's Frozen as a way of repopularizing the organ. And then I got sick. That's the title of the story. And that's why I look kind of overbaked. As I was soaking in the ice water, realizing that for the first time since I've been in Florida, I actually felt cold. I thought of two things. One, there was actually SPF 35 sunscreen in the cabin of the boat. And there's no one to blame for any of this but myself, and I won't even do that because it doesn't work. It doesn't help. Number two, there's got to be an object lesson in this somewhere to make it all worthwhile. And there is. More than one. But the one that occurred to me was about burning. Burning. Specifically, the way my confirmation pastor described hell. You know, I grew up as a Lutheran. Lutherans being confirmed at 12 or 13 years old. The confirmation pastor was highly influential in my young life, and in some ways, he still is. He asked the confirmation class, have you ever been burned? You know, accidentally touched the stove, or maybe brushed by somebody that lit cigarettes, something like that. And of course, we're all teenagers, and by then, most of us had been. So we open up our hands, yeah, we know what that feels like, we feel good. So pastor goes, you know, imagine that feeling. Imagine that feeling all over your body. Imagine that feeling all over your body. Every inch of your skin burning. Except that instead of how it would be in real life, where presumably you would eventually pass out and just die, you don't ever die. You just stay burning. That same feeling forever and ever and ever. Well, that's hell, he said. And at that point, even the wise guys in the class were silent. Even the really cool girls who were always looking at their compacts, I guess because cell phones weren't invented yet, were staring straight ahead. That's hell, he said. That's hell, said the man called to teach us about God's love. Well, I had nightmares for about a month, and sometimes I still do. Now I can complain about my second-degree sunburn, but in truth, I've administered burn victims. I visited children in children's hospitals with bandages covering their bodies and faces because they survived a fire in their house that was set by a drop cigarette that somebody went to sleep. Sunburn puts it in perspective, though. It hurts. I'm tempted to say it hurts like hell, but maybe after my last description I shouldn't say that, should I? And what I felt, that sunburn is probably only a small percentage of what a real burn victim feels. I once burned the bottom of my hand with a soldering iron, and blisters for months. Maybe that's closer to what my childhood confirmation pastor was talking about, because I could go on with the horror stories about burning and burning. Is that hell? And I guess my question for all of us is that what a loving God wants for his creation? Is that what a loving God would do to those made in his image? Now, in truth, I am just a man. A sinner. Maybe I'm even evil. Some people call me that. Because I figure I'm about as evil as the next guy, despite the Holy Joe Roller priest outfit. But I gotta be honest with you here. I wouldn't wish that description of hell on my worst enemy. I wouldn't wish that description of hell on people who held a knife in my throat. I wouldn't wish that description of hell on people who had bullets in my body. Honestly, I wouldn't. I'm just a human being. You know, there are moments I'll confess that an eye for an eye seems like a pretty good idea. There are a few eyes I wish I could have poked out, and a few teeth I wish I could have broken. Vengeance is mine, bellows the angry Old Testament God. Vengeance. But really, seriously, burning forever? Well, as a fear tactic, I guess it works. It worked for us in confirmation. Of course, we didn't have that rough, we were Lutheran. Sola gratia, grace alone and all that. Just believe and trust God's grace, trust the fact that he hit Jesus instead of us, and we'd be okay. We'd get into heaven, or at least we'd avoid the human barbecue, or technicality and a promise. Then, of course, I had asked myself, even then, I was always asking questions, always getting asking questions. I'd ask myself, what are those not lucky enough to have been born in the right faith? You know, it's the expression when it fits here, but SOL. You know what that means? SOL? That's not a luck. Fill in the blank. There, but for the sola gratia of God, go on. What about my Jewish best friend? And a kid in my freshman high school class who committed suicide. And the old man in the neighborhood who died in his sleep, who never went to church but was nice as hell to all the kids in the neighborhood, no matter what. What about Gandhi? He wasn't a Christian, was he? But he was sure as hell better man than me. What about Plato or Aristotle or Thomas Jefferson? I hear TJ was pretty shaky on that Jesus stuff. What about, how does the song go? 40,000 men and women every day don't fear the reaper. That's more than 40,000 every day. How many of those people die as Christians? And the ones who don't, are they all burning in hell? What about the baby that lived an hour before dying? I think about I think about the brother or sister I almost had. Mom had a miscarriage before I came into this world. And I wonder, there are those who say that babies, they have souls when they're first conceived. And I tend to believe that because the Lord knew us before we were formed of his womb. But they had a soul, they inherited original sin, and that miscarried baby, the baby died 5 months old, 5 months in the womb, that is. Is that baby in hell? Just asking. The same man who told me about hell said that even babies go to hell if they're not baptized. Because even they are sinners, inheritors of original sin, a stench in the nostrils of holy God, all burning in hell. And my immediate question was, and I suppose it still is, what kind of God is that? What kind of God get into a tiny little bit of our gospel text this afternoon, before I do, I want to pause and say that I'm aware this may disturb some of you. If not right in the sanctuary, then out in internet land somewhere. It's kind of, I was going to say funny, amusing, ironic, that as it turns out, the idea of hell, eternal conscious torment, is one of Christianity's most beloved beliefs. It seems we can't quite wrap our mind around something good, like the reward, as is talked about in this passage, without something to contrast it like hell. And that's human nature, isn't it? It's human nature, it's human culture. And there are no losers, there are no guys like me. How can we tell like a really good-looking guy like Norman? Just making sure you're awake there, buddy. If there are no losers, how can there be winners? If there are no poor people, how can there be any rich people? Unlike Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon, in the real world, all the children are not above average. So you may be attached to the notion of hell, probably because there are a lot of people you think belong there. Maybe, like me, at least now I have been at times in my life, you may have even told people to go there. As I said before, it's never my job to tell anyone what to believe. I do want to present to you this afternoon the beginnings of a different way to look at what Scripture purports Jesus to have said. Now, if we look at today's passage, we would see that it doesn't say anything about hell per se. Rather, it talks about reward. But again, reward for us always seems to imply that the alternative must be some form of punishment. In fact, the statement from our text, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it, is typically interpreted something like, if you live the way you want to. You know, if Norman just goes and grabs as many bologna sandwiches as he wants to, and Gertis, as soon as I'm out of this church service, I'm going down to that local bar and I'm going to drink a thick whiskey. And Bess goes ahead and says, as soon as I'm out of this hot box church, I'm going to go find somebody I don't like their face and I'm going to beat them to a pulp as I can. We live the way we want to, do all the fun stuff. So how the world equates sin and fun. If we do that, then in the end we don't land in hell. On the other hand, if we give up the fun things in life, and take up a cross, we'll eventually get to go to heaven. Much as we often interpret the other similar parts of this chapter in Matthew as being indicative of eternal conscious torment. But I can present an alternative viewpoint. It is, in fact, a viewpoint that's potentially more frustrating and for some maybe even scarier than the more traditional interpretation. It's also more compassionate. I'm fond of quoting St. Augustine on this. I did so last week's sermon, and I do it all the time. You've probably heard me say this. If we believe in a merciful God, if we believe in a God in whom there is no darkness, in whom there is no shadow of turning, a God who is not like us, capricious, changing God's mind all the time, one day feeling this way, another day feeling that way. If we believe in a God who is full of mercy and love, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, then, as Augustine said, we must not leave any scriptural passage until we have found a compassionate interpretation. And the clue in this passage, at least this one, the biggest clue comes towards the end, verse 42. It goes like this. Whoever gives one of these little ones, even a cup of cold water, because he is my disciple, truly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. Now, the phrase for little ones in this verse in Koine Greek is ton mikron. That's about a gobbledygook, unless you speak my name Greek, which you probably don't, there's no reason to. But the phrase happens to be ton mikron, and if you're taking notes, it's T-O-M like a ton, and mikron like the measurement, micron, okay? And that means something besides just physically small people. It means people of no account. People the world considers unimportant. Not just little ones like the opposite of me, but little ones who have no authority. Little ones that don't carry any sway in the world. The phrase could be a reference to the orphan, the homeless, sometimes the aged, the pauper. If you are willing to give a cup to one of those no-account individuals, perform an act of compassion, now know what it says next. You will not lose. You can only lose what you already have. You can't lose something you don't have yet. You will not lose your reward. Do this act of compassion, you won't lose your reward, which would imply if you're doing the act of compassion, you've already got something. And to not be doing this act of compassion, if you choose not to, maybe you never have that reward at all. And here's what I'd like to suggest. This passage, this business of losing your life and finding it, or keeping your life and then losing it, is not about heaven and hell at all. For many reasons, not the least of which is that both of those concepts were barely, if at all, understood by the Jewish people in Jesus' day. Please, don't take my word for this. Look this up sometime. Jewish people did not have an understanding of heaven. They did not have an understanding of hell the way we think of hell. So, those notions, by the way, they were imposed by the Christian church at somewhat later dates, centuries later. But I believe Jesus to be talking about here is something potentially even more disturbing, but in the end also 1,000 times better. I believe that what the Lord of life is saying to us is that there are two ways in which a person may live. And by the way, Jesus always talks about life. Have you noticed that? It's kind of funny that Christianity is associated with the religion of death. We're somber, we're just in black. Jesus doesn't even do with death. Jesus avoids death. Jesus disassembles death. Think about this. When confronted with death, either Jesus undoes it, for example, by raising the dead, or by raising himself from the dead. Jesus simply will not tolerate death. I guess it's kind of funny, he won't take it lying down. You try to knock him down, or else he dismisses it. Jesus has been known to dismiss death. Jesus, I will follow, of course I'll follow you, Jesus, but I've got to go bury my father first. Okay, I'll follow you, but let the dead bury their dead. Jesus has nothing to do with life. When Jesus speaks, it's about life, and here I believe he's saying there are two ways to live. One is the way that Jesus invites us to, the way of love, service, peace, compassion. And perhaps above all, forgiveness. The other, second way, is the way we're pretty much all taught to, and in ourselves probably want to. You know that way. Look out for number one. Take care of yourself. And then if there's anything left over, help the others if they deserve it. Maybe. But if you're willing for a moment to consider losing that way of life, if you can lose that thing that you think of as your life, the me first, the scraping and the reaching and the stepping on to get to the higher place, if you can lose that, willing to lose that, then you will find, I believe, something far, far better. What the Bible calls the boundless life. We sometimes translate that as eternal life. The Greek word, by the way, is zoe. Z-O-E, if you're taking notes. And by the way, that's something that doesn't happen by and by when we die. It happens right now. That's what Jesus wants for you. Right now. The boundless life. So you ask, okay, that's great, I get it. Boy, that's a lot better than being old Harry's down there burning in hell forever. Okay. Well, let me ask you something, Pastor. What does that mean for me? Well, here's the closing shot. If you really want hell, I mean, really attached to this concept, you can have it if you really want, but not after you die. You can have hell for yourself and probably for everyone around you right now, if you want, by holding on to that life of self, the life that concentrates on the unholy trinity of me, myself, and I. What must I do for me by myself? You will find sooner or later that you will create a personal hell. You can turn this world up. If enough people do this, you know, if Norman and Al and Susan and me and all, we're just living for ourselves. The hell with the rest of the world. Just living for ourselves. And pretty soon, Javisi's doing it, and, everybody's doing it. Even Mala. Everybody's doing it, just living for themselves and nobody else. Pretty soon we got whole nations doing this. We had nations gathering together saying, it's all about us. We got to do it in our own country. You know what kind of a world we're going to have? We're going to have a world that is full of wars and rumors of wars. We don't have that now, right? No. We have a world that's constant warfare. Especially, by the way, places where there are resources that people want, like oil. Because, hey, we're living for ourselves, we got to get those things. We'll come up with a good justification by the world. We're going to have a war with a world with a highly flawed justice system. You can buy justice. And we call things corrections. When somebody steps out of line, well, it doesn't stigmatize people. Kind of where the world is prejudice. We look at people, whether they're black, white, sunburned, and we judge them on that before we even know anything about them. Aren't you glad you don't have a world like that? Oh, wait, we do. You want to know why, ladies and gentlemen? Because this is it. What the hell right here? God doesn't have to send anybody to hell. We make it here. We make it. You make it. I make it. The world makes hell right here. The alternative. The alternative is to give that life up. Give that life up. But Pastor, it's hard. It's really difficult. And there's people I don't like. There's people I'm angry. There's people who have done me wrong, Pastor. Yeah, tell me about it. You want to compare lists? But here's what I say to you. Here's what I'll say. When we do this little by little, every time we say a kind word instead of an angry word, every time we forgive, we don't have to. It's like this. When we lose self, take up the cross of service, of compassion, of prayer, even of our enemies. When we do as Jesus said, loving others as he loved us, treating others as we would like to be treated, we gain that life that God intends for his children. And rather than a hell on earth, we bring about, day by day, action by action, word by kind word, we bring the kingdom closer to earth. Make a song.